Assalamu alaikum. Hello everyone. In this video I will talk about a very useful method to help you memorize physics equations and even equations in general, no matter what is the science that you're learning. Now this is a very popular method. It is called the triangle method. I see a lot of people explaining it, but most people miss something that I think is very important, and it confuses students a lot, which I will talk about by the end of this video. But for now, let's explain what is the triangle method. So let's say we have an equation that says something called x is equal to something called y multiplied by something called z. So what does this mean? This means that if we have the value of z and the value of y, we could multiply them to get the value of x. Okay, what if I don't have the value of one of these? Let's say I have the value of y and the value of x, but I don't have the value of z. What do I do in this case? So since this is a very simple equation, we can obviously tell that if we want the value of z, we divide both sides by y to isolate the z and to eliminate this y, and we end up with this equation. Z is equal to x divided by y. If we wanted to find the value of y, we just divide both sides by z, and we end up with y is equal to x divided by z. So what is the triangle method? The triangle method, basically you just draw a triangle and you take the x. I will talk about why the x goes on top and not the y or z in just a moment. Let me just explain what is the triangle method. So you take the x on top of your triangle, the y and z go at the bottom. So you basically the triangle method is you basically just, if you want to find the value of y, for example, you just cover the y and you see what's left. Well, you're left with x divided by z, and this, which is this equation. If you want to find the value of z, you just cover the z and you're left with x divided by y, which is this equation. If you want the value of x, you just cover the x and you're left with y times z. This is multiplication. I just sometimes like to write a small multiplication sign to make it simple, which is this equation, x equals y z. So this is basically the triangle method. So let's talk about why did we put the x on top of the triangle and not the y or z. I will explain that. Just let me use a different paper. So you will get this equation, the previous equation, in three forms. You could get it in this form, which is this one, x equals y z, or z equals x divided by y, or this way, y is equal to x divided by z. So if you get the equation this way, in this form, it is very simple. You just, because you have a fraction, you just take the numerator, and since it's already on top of the fraction bar, it will stay on top of your triangle. So you can see that the same value is on top of the fraction bar. It is always in the numerator. It's never in the denominator, no matter what is the value that you're looking for. So you just take the x and put it on top of the triangle, and what's left goes at the bottom, y, z. So what if we get the equation this way? What do we do? Well, you can see that the y and the z are next to each other, and they will stay next to each other in your triangle. You could also think about it this way. If you get two values next to each other, you just take the value which is before the equal sign and put it on top of your triangle. So no matter what, so now you should be able to tell which value goes on top of your triangle, no matter what is the form of equation that you get. So let's take one quick example to explain this concept. Let's take this simple physics equation that says velocity is equal to displacement over time. So if we want to draw a triangle for this equation, which goes on top and which goes at the bottom? Since we got the equation this way, we can tell that we have a fraction bar. We have a fraction, and we always take what is on top of the fraction bar, which is displacement in this case. So displacement will go on top of our triangle, or at the top. The time and velocity will go at the bottom. So let's just apply what we learned. If we want to find the time, we just covered the time, and we're left with t equals displacement over velocity. If we want to find the velocity, we're left with displacement over time. So we're left with v equals displacement over time. If we want the displacement, we just multiply the time. We're left with the time. So remember, this is a multiplication. We're left with time multiplied by velocity, which is this equation. D, or displacement, equals time multiplied by velocity. So that's how the the triangle method works. So you could see it is very helpful, especially when you have to memorize so many equations. You just I'm talking about myself. I like to draw a small triangle next to each equation, just to help me memorize and remember. So once you remember the value that goes on top of your triangle, the next is relatively simple. So you just have to learn. You have to remember which value goes on top of your triangle, and then the rest is very simple. So this is a very basic. This is very simple equation. So let's say what if we, and this is what confuses students a lot. So what if we have more than 3 values? So you can see that we have, in this equation, we have only 3 values: velocity, time, displacement, and it is very simple. There's nothing to be confused about. So what if we have something a little more complex? Something like this. Let's say we have, I don't know, let's say we have a value called m multiplied by a value called n. I'm just making up letters. This does not mean anything. And they are equal to s, v, r, q, o. So these are all multiplied. So remember that these are multiplied. We're talking about multiplication. If there is addition or subtraction, these rules does not apply. We're just talking about multiplication. Make sure that these values are all multiplied, even these two. Okay, so what do? I see most students, when they see so many values like this, they just freak out and think that the triangle method does not apply. In this case, well, it does apply. Very simple. It is basically the same thing, but with a little bit of change. It is basically the same thing. So you draw a line, you draw a triangle, and we just apply what we learned before. Well, we got the equation this way. You could see that these are next to each other, which means that they all will go at the bottom of the triangle. So no matter what, no matter how many values you have, as long as they are next to each other, they will go at the bottom. And also the m times n will go at the top, since they are before the equal sign, and we don't have a fraction right here. Okay, so the m n will go at the top of the triangle. The S, V, R, Q, O will go at the bottom. So it is better to just divide them, draw little lines to make everything simple. You could just leave them as they are, but it's better to just write these lines. So what do we do? Well, we do the same thing that we learned before. So let's say we want to find the value of S. What do? We just cover the S, and we're left with m times n divided by v times r times q times o. And this is how you find the S. You can see that it is basically the same idea. M n divided by v r q o. And this is how you find the S. So let's say we want to find the r. What do? We just cover the r, and we're left with m times n divided by s v q o, which is this equation. R equals m times n divided by s v q o. So it is very simple, and you can see that this method is very helpful. So let's see what if we want to find the value of n? What do? We want to find the value of this n. What do? Well, we'll look for the equation that has the n before the equal sign, which is this equation. What do? We just write the equation as it is. M times n is equal to S V R Q O. And then what do? Well, since we only need the value of n, we don't need the value of m. We just want the value of n. We simply divide both sides by m to eliminate this m and to isolate the n that we want to find the value for. And we're left with, let me write this here, n equals SVRQO divided by m. And that's how it works. So let's take one example to explain this concept. Let's take the Newton's law for gravitational universal gravitation. Newton's law of universal gravitation says that force is equal to gravity times the mass of the first object times the mass of the second object divided by the distance squared, the distance between these two objects. So what do? So this is the magnitude of the gravitational force. So don't worry about these values. You just have. I just want to. You probably don't need to understand everything about what these values mean. I just want to explain the triangle method for you. So what do? So what goes if we want to draw a triangle? What goes at the top and what goes at the bottom? You just look at the equation that you have, you have a fraction bar, you have a fraction. Well then, if we have a fraction, what do? We take the value on top of the fraction, which is this, the numerator, and we put it on top of the triangle. We take everything, no matter what. And remember, this is multiplication. No addition, no subtraction. This is very, very important. If you have, if these two are added to each other, this will not apply. So only multiplication. So this is equal to g m1 m2. And then what goes at the bottom? Well, whatever left goes at the bottom. R squared, and here will the f will go. Okay, what if we want to find the value of f? Just cover the f, and we're left with f is equal to g m1 times m2 divided by r squared. What if we want to find the r squared? We just cover the r squared, and we're left with r squared equals g m1 times m2 divided by f. Okay, very simple. If we want to find the value of g m1 m2, we just cover the g m1 m2, and we're left with f times r squared. G m1 m2 is equal to f times r squared. What if we want to find the value of one of these three? What if we want to find the value of this one, of the mass of the first object? What do? So let me use a different paper, and we'll draw our triangle just to make everything clear. G m1 m2 and f r squared. Okay, we want to find the value of this m. What do? We take the equation that has the m1 before the equal sign, which is this equation. You could see that it has the m1 before the equal sign. So we write it as it is. G m1 m2 is equal to f times r squared. And since we only want to find this value, we divide both sides by g and m2 to eliminate them from this part of the equation. So g m2, these will cancel, and these will cancel, and divide the other side by the same value. And we're left with m1 is equal to f r squared divided by g m2, and that's how you find m1. It's the same thing. If you wanted to find the g, we divide both sides by m1 m2. If we want to find the value of m2, we divide both sides by g m1. So you could see that it is very, very simple, and it explains a lot of things that most students think that are very hard, and this is very basic algebra. So once you understand this concept, everything will be simple for you. So I hope this video helps. I hope this makes sense to you. And so yeah, thank you very much for watching.